If you didn't already know, I host a monthly nonfiction book club, and we've read some really incredible books over the past 2 years. But today, I want to do something a little different and do a recap video of last month's book and share the top 4 lessons that I learned. Now, if you are interested in joining the book club, it's completely for free. I'll leave a link down below. It's a great way to interact with other like-minded bookworms from around the world. But in March of this year, we read the book Digital Body Language by Erica Dhawan. Now, the first lesson that really stood out to me from this book is being extra aware of the language you use online in the digital world. Now, speaking from a little bit of experience, if you work in a job that involves a lot of email or instant messaging, there is something called corporate talk. This is basically a way of speaking that is very polite, but usually has a deeper passive-aggressive meaning below it. Now, for example, a common corporate talk phrase I see all the time that I'm guilty of using myself is "per my last email." Now, this may seem very innocent if you read it, but most of the time when someone includes "per my last email" in their message, it usually means they're annoyed at the person receiving the email because they're having to repeat themselves for something that was already said. Another common phrase I see all the time is bumping this to the top of your inbox. Again, it could seem very innocent at first, but usually it means the person is getting annoyed that they're having to remind you about something that you should have done a long time ago. Context is really important when it comes to corporate talk. Again, we're all learning this new language of corporate digital world communication. It's a new thing that just happened in the past couple decades, really. So no one has a rule book for any of this stuff. What's really important, though, is just being aware that certain phrases you might say will seem direct to you, but for other people, they may be coming across in a very different and unintended way. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is my phone. Now, if someone does call me and my phone rings, I usually let it go to voicemail. As somebody who has grown up in an era full of, again, emails, instant messaging, and DMs, phone calls are becoming really foreign to me. And in fact, I would argue to say that the phone app on my phone is the least used app that I have. Whenever my phone does ring and I know there's a real person waiting on the other side of the phone, I usually feel a sudden burst of anxiety. And I've always wondered where this comes from. Why am I feeling so anxious when my phone is ringing? Since when did the phone become something that I should be worried about? It turns out I'm actually not alone with feeling this way. There's a name for this. It's called phone phobia. And it's basically the idea that when you get a text message, you have full control over when and how you respond. With unexpected phone calls, though, it is the opposite. You feel vulnerable, you start to feel a little panicky, and that's exactly what happens to me. Now, if you're listening to me right now and you think I'm sounding completely ridiculous, that is also okay, because there's a lot of people out there who almost always communicate through phone calls and hate using text messages. From reading this book and discussing it with others, I am learning there is no one-size-fit-all approach for digital communication. Whether it's the way you punctuate your sentences or how long you take to respond to a message, there are a million different ways your communication could be interpreted. So when it comes down to it, how do we actually manage this in the real world? How do we ensure our communication is as good as it can be when working with their teammates at work or wherever else it might be? And what it comes down to is having a general awareness of the people you work with. Do the people you work with have a similar communication style to you, or is it very different? What your needs are might not be the same as others. Moving right along, the next lesson I want to talk about revolves around emails. Now, I don't know about you, but the undo send feature is my favorite feature of email. I often write very strongly worded emails in my email drafts just to get my frustration out, and it's a really great way of just venting to yourself without actually pressing send. But if you do press send by mistake, having that unsend button is really helpful. Now, perhaps you did send an email that you did not intend to send. Maybe it was something that you just wrote out of frustration, or maybe it was a regular email that contained a typo or a missing attachment. Sometimes Gmail, for example, will remind you for simple things, but oftentimes there could be a million things that could go wrong when sending an email. Now, in the book, Erica gives us several tips for sending better emails, but there were 3 tips specifically that really stood out to me that I want to share with you. The first tip is always remembering the 3 W's every single time you send an email. The first W is who. Your email should never be addressed to a group of people. You should be very specific of who the email is for. The second W is what. What is the description of the email? What is the clear point of this email? And the third W is when. when is the deadline that you're trying to communicate. Just imagine for a second if every email you received contained all 3 W's every single time. So much time is wasted in unclear emails, so always make sure your emails contain these 3 W's. The second tip for sending better emails is understanding the purpose of your email. Are you just sending an email for an FYI purpose? And if that's the case, be sure to mention that and that no response is needed. Or perhaps you're asking for information or a request for a decision. That should be clearly noted as well. And the last tip is just a general idea of slowing down before you press that send button. Always check for the basics. Does your email have a subject line? Did you spell the person's name right? Any typos you can fix? Always slow down. Don't ever send an email in the heat of the moment. Just take some time to breathe and make sure you double check every email that you send. The last lesson that stood out to me from this book is the idea of bias in the digital world. Erica discusses bias at length toward the end of the book, and I really enjoyed this section. Now, candidly speaking, we are all influenced by bias one way or another. There's no way around it. There's so many different types of biases. There's gender bias, generation bias. There's all other kinds of biases, and the one that really stood out to me from this book is something called name bias. Since a lot of my YouTube work involves posting on social media, I am very conscious of my name. When someone sees Maneetpaul Singh show up in their newsfeed, I have no doubt that there is some bias regarding my credibility or my background that comes in that person's mind the first time they see me. I often get asked why I don't just go by Paul as my name, since it's already part of my full name. Why not just shorten it? And honestly, it would probably make my life a lot easier when meeting new people, but I am choosing not to do that. I'm actually very grateful to have such a unique name, and I use it as a conversation starter, and I love helping people pronounce something that they probably never would do otherwise. And I also have to say that I'm trying really hard to make my name as easy to pronounce by including the pronunciation in things like my email signature or my YouTube descriptions, helping people wherever I can, because it shouldn't be my responsibility to shorten my name, but I can help people pronounce it if they want to. Another form of bias that I found really insightful is culture bias. Now, there are 2 types of culture that exist in the world in terms of communication. There's high context culture and low context culture. Now, high context culture relies heavily on non-verbal communication. So body language is actually a really big part of the communication. We see this a lot, for example, in Asia. Over here in the West, though, low context culture is much more prevalent. We can get by being much more direct and not offending anyone. But when we combine people from different cultures together, we often see a miscommunication happen. Now, again, speaking from experience, I get to interact with people from all over the world because of these YouTube videos, and I've seen a very clear difference in the way people communicate simply in the way they start their emails, for example, when they're talking to me. The way I approach this is trying my best to mirror however the person is speaking to me. So if someone's being really formal to me in their communication, I will try to reciprocate that. Or if someone's being very informal and casual, I will reciprocate that. It's all about context. Now, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this video. Did you find it helpful? Should I keep making regular book club videos like this? Please leave a comment down below with your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.